Well, my lecture today pertains to Two Brothers. Two Brothers was written by Hanie Rayson, and it happens to be one of the important plays written by this Australian playwright in the year 2004 and 5. The play was published in 2005, and it was at that time only that it was performed for the first time. But what made the play so popular? The question is that. So the play became popular because it tried to touch a very important issue, a very sensitive issue, which had become actually the headlines of various newspapers. But then, not many people were able to talk about it openly. The issue that I'm trying to talk about here has to do with the policy of uh, the policy for refugees, asylum seekers, right? What should be the policy of a country for those who want to seek refuge somewhere? When we talk about the refugee problem, of course, our attention is drawn to the refugees in various parts of the globe, right? So here as well, because refugees, you never know out of what reason one can actually go to another country. But when we say refugees usually go to another country. Why? Because the conditions in their own nations, they are not conducive, right? So somewhere there is a threat to their liberty, threat to their life, threat to their belongings, threat to their property, right? I mean, everything that refugees usually own, these people usually own in their own countries, that immediately comes under attack the moment there is some sort of upheaval. Now that upheaval, now that catastrophe, that can be political in nature, right? Or that can be one of natural disasters, or that can be because of the war, right? So in my previous lecture on Australian literature, we talked about the Vietnam War, and here and we did talk, of course, how Australia at the time was accepting refugees, right? And eventually what happened in the years 1996 onwards or 1992 onwards, why there was such a change, that this question of taking in more refugees, it began to attract nationwide attention of people, right? So the question here is that when we talk about asylum, these asylum seekers or refugees, of course, we know one thing, that they have already lived through a nightmarish experience in their own countries. They have gone through really harrowing experiences in their native land, and it is for this reason that they have fled their home nation, right? Their home state. So for this reason, now the question is that, is it, I mean, morally, if we talk about the morality of accepting refugees, then of course all of us would agree that governments, they should come up with the mechanism, governments in various countries across the globe, with the mechanism where the refugees could be, they could be accepted, right? And then of course, let those refugees then be given jobs, employment, and so on and so forth, I mean, as per their education, right? But sometimes it so happens that when there are so many refugees, and they outnumber the population of a country, right? Any country, so at that time the refugees, they may also become a sort of threat to the native people, because they think that we are being outnumbered by the refugees, or our jobs are being taken by the refugees, right? That is one of the important things which comes to my mind. And then this play in particular, Two Brothers, right, it discusses this question of a refugee problem on a really larger scale. Now the issue pertains to Australia, but then it does bring to fore Of course, the concern of the international political community, right? International governments as to how to tackle the refugee problem, or how to make situations at homes really negotiable, so that people may not have to run for their lives to other countries. But one thing that we all would agree is that when people flee their own countries, of course, they flee for their lives. They want to save their lives, and if they do not get acceptance in other countries immediately, we know that the suffering that becomes multifold, manifold. I mean, it becomes a more intense than it would have been in their own countries, right? So these were the issues which are which Henry Rayson wanted to discuss in the play under discussion. Now, the play Two Brothers, as I told you, Two Brothers was published in the year 2005. And when you read Two Brothers, or when you have read the whole play, right? So we are immediately reminded of the Bollywood movie. I hope many of us would have seen that in this part of the country, that is in India. Diwar, right? This Diwar movie, directed by Yash Raj, Yash Raj, right? This movie was produced in the year 1975, if I'm not mistaken. And then here as well we find two brothers, right? Although the issues that have been discussed in the play, they do not have that similarity with the issues discussed in that movie called Divar, right? How there is the Divar, a wall which separates two brothers, right? Now there the wall is that one brother actually becomes a police officer, whereas the other brother, he takes to crime. Why? Because the situations were so grim that he loses all his interest in law and police and so on and so forth, right? So there emerges that Diwar. But what is common between two brothers that we are studying and Diwar? The common is that these two brothers, uh, they happen to belong to a family, right? So it is not like a two friends, it is not like two neighbors, or the play is not titled for that matter. Even for that matter, I'm saying two cousins, right? So it is two brothers who happen to be the real brothers. And then uh, I mean, brothers, are they able to accommodate their differences or not? Right? So the question is that when they are able to accommodate their differences, then how would those differences will be negotiated, accommodated, and so on and so forth, right? There as well in the movie we find there are those differences, right? And we have such dialogues as, आज मेरे पास सब कुछ है, धन दौलत महल सब कुछ, लेकिन तुम्हारे पास क्या है? तो मेरे पास माँ है. That is what he says there. But in this play in Two Brothers, there is neither mother, or there is nor even father. So both father and mother, they are lost. Why? Because we find that the father here, who is the father of two politicians in the play, that father happens to care more for what? More for his business, his empire, and so on and so forth, rather than for something else, right, friends? So, what I want to state here is that Two Brothers, it has deliberately been titled Two Brothers. That can two brothers, they turn against one another, and if they turn against one another, then on what grounds, right? So these are the two sides that are presented on the both sides of the fence, right? Both sides of the fence. So we will be looking at everything which has been discussed in the play. I mean, this lecture happens to be introductory in nature, but a few historical events that become important here. First, I would like to read a quote here to begin with. This play was actually published and performed in 2005, and then I mean, there is Professor Pankaj Kesing who has actually visited Professor Pankaj Kesing, who used to who is a retired professor from Himachal Pradesh University, Shimla. She writes about the play that this play caused an intense media storm. It was discussed in the newspapers for 13 days in a row as news items, opinion pieces, letters to the editor, and so on. It touched a very raw nerve regarding immigration, border policies, asylum seekers. The play ran for 4 months to packed houses, right? So, what I want to say here is that what is it that the play had been able to touch upon, or what were the issues that the play talked about? Why the play ran for actually these 4 months, and that too packed theaters, right? So the reason being that it touched that really very sensitive issue, as I did talk about to you earlier. And there is one more thing that I want to talk here. Hanie Rayson actually, who in one of her interviews with Hillary Glow happens to be one of the important writers in Australia, and she has written extensively on theater. So the playwright here, that is Hanie Rayson, she spoke in an interview with Hillary Glow. What she says is, I quote her, I suppose I don't think there has been an Australian play that has been discussed so much. 18 months after the first production, if I Google the news and myself, there is always something in the news, something that talks about two brothers. Right, friends? Now, uh, it shows the popularity of the play that it gained after the play was published. Now, the reason why it became very popular. Now, friends, we find in the play there are two brothers. One is Ex Benedict, and another one is Tom. There are two brothers. Now, Eggs is the one who is the minister for home security, right? In the conservative government, right? Eggs, I'm talking about Eggs, uh, security minister, right? And then on the other hand, we have Tom, who happens to be a lawyer, and at the same time, he heads this foundation in the play called the Lawson Foundation. Right, friends? Now, these two brothers here, that is Eggs Benedict first, right? Eggs. Now, when we talk about the historical, that is circumstances of Australia or politics of Australia, so there were actually two brothers, right? And they were known as Tim and Costello, right? Tim and Costello. Costello, more exact, just a minute. Costello and Tim, of course, as I pointed out. Uh, Costello was the deputy prime minister in the government of John Howard. John Howard became the prime minister in Australia in the year 1996, right? So from the year 1996 to 2007, he consecutively won the elections for the three times. Now, what would have been the reasons that he won the elections, right? So it is in John Howard's government that Tim Costello, actually, that is Costello, what I'm talking about, that he was the deputy prime minister, right? Costello. Now, Costello, as such, when he was the deputy prime minister, it is said that he was waiting to become the prime minister. So he was the prime minister in waiting, as we find in the play. X is the prime minister in waiting. At least X thinks that in the play, right? So there as well, Costello's brother in the real life, Costello's brother was Tim, right? His name was Tim, and he was a lawyer, and he also headed an NGO, right? And the name of the NGO was the Vision, right? It was known as the Vision. So we find here that both of them, they were brothers, but right, mind you, one brother was given to this cause of what you call this. He was altruistic, right? He was given to the welfare of refugees or other pertinent pressing issues. And on the other hand, there was Costello, who was hungry for becoming the prime minister, right? So these two brothers, perhaps they were in the mind of the writer when she wrote about this historical incident that took place actually in 2001. I'll talk about that eventually. So what I want to say here is that the character of Tim is actually, or the character of rather Tom in the play is based on Tim. Why? Because Tom also has the Lawson Foundation, right? So whereas X, as I told you, X, the character of X is based on Costello, who was the deputy prime minister in the liberal government, right, friends? So these two brothers here, perhaps they may have become, I'm not saying completely, but then they happen to be one of the, you call this inspirations, or to be more exact, one of the reasons why she happened to title this play as The Two Brothers, right? So the question is like that, what happened eventually? Because I told you that John Howard, he remained the prime minister from 1996 to 2007, but then in 2007 he lost the election, and then Costello could not actually become the prime minister, mind you. Although here we find that the person here, that is Eggs, at the end of the play, he assumes that political post there, right? And then on the other hand, this another character, Tim, of course, sorry, Tom, in the play, Tom continues working for the NGO that he was a part of, right? Now, friends, the thing is that these two brothers, they actually represent two sides of the political reality, right? Two sides of the political reality, that is one working for gaining more and more power, and the other one working for the betterment of the asylum seekers. That is what we find in the play, that Tom is actually heading that Lawson Foundation, which works for the welfare of refugees who come to Australia, right? And on the other hand, we talk about, that is X, who in order to become the prime minister plays with the lives of his, that is, own brother. He even kills a refugee, I'll be talking about that as well. And then he also does what, he tries to implicate his own nephew, that is the son of his own brother Tom, in a false drug addiction case or drug smuggler case, right, friends? So these are the things which happen there. Second thing is, friends, one more quote that I would like to quote here is, that is there is a very important writer in Australia called Catherine Brisbane, and she has also researched a lot on theater, written a lot on theater. She writes about this play, right? What she writes is that Two Brothers is a thriller which, within the parameters of dramatic entertainment, poses some moral questions. Questions are: when power is in your hands, how far will ideology and personal ambition drive you? Does the end ever justify the means? In order to argue this, the author creates two brothers, opposite in temperament and outlook, but linked by strong family ties. One is a prime minister in waiting who believes any means are justifiable if your aim is the common good, and the other, the head of a charitable foundation who believes that good can only be achieved by acting with a clear conscience, right? It is what she says. And then uh, this writer, what she also says is that of course she also had her own brother in mind, right? It is what Hanie Rayson says, that she also had her own brother in mind when she wrote this play. Why? Because he had a different temperament, while I had a completely different temperament, right? So one possibility is those Costello brothers, and another possibility is that she had her brother in mind as well. But then another important question which remains unanswered is, why did she choose to write this play in the first place? So she was actually disturbed by a few questions, right? And the most important question was that in October 2001, October 2001, there was an Indonesian fishing boat which drowned in the sea, right? Sorry, this boat sank in the sea. This boat was actually carrying nearly 421 passengers. Mind you, there were nearly 421 members on board this ship. And then the problem in the sense was that they were running out from where they were running out from their own respective countries. Why? Because the situation was there was grim, right? And they wanted to take shelter in Australia, right? So what happened was that at this time, when this boat started sailing from Indonesia, the boat was not in a condition to even support the weight of even 150 these people. But then there were 400, as I told you, 21, nearly 421 21 people here on the boat. Now this boat, the moment it reached actually the near these Australian waters, right? So at that time, it so happened that the boat, it began to sink, right? The boat, as I told you, it was dilapidated. No, it was not in a good condition, and then it began to sink in the sea. So at that time, it so happened that that there were two actually boats, right? Two more actually these ships, and those ships, they belong to the Australian Navy. And those two ships, they come there, they come nearer to that boat, that fishing boat, which sank there. But then they did not rescue, that is, the people who were drowning there. They came nearer, but they did not do anything, right? So in this incident, nearly 353, right, 353 people, they died, right? 353. And most of these people, they were actually, most among these people, they were women and children. Now the question was that why did the Australian ships not try to intercept these boats there, right? Why they were not allowed to intercept, right? Because all the boats which were coming to, which were trying to come to Australia at that time, they were intercepted by the Australian, that is, Navy. And here eventually it comes to be known that perhaps it was the Australian government which had given these orders for the Australian Navy not to actually either rescue these people or not to intercept these boats. That is exactly what we find in the play as well. That X, he orders his son not to take that rescue operation, right, in the water. So we do find that thing there in the play as well. And we find that this very ship which sinks there, the name of the ship is Calypsan, right? Calypsan, that you can find in the play, right? And whereas in reality the name of the ship was Kalgoorlie, right? Kalgoorlie. And then such kind of ships were, this ship here, it was termed by the Australian government, by the Australian Navy, as SIEVX. Mind you, SIEVX. Now SIEVX stands for Suspected Illegal Entry Vessel, right? Suspected Illegal Entry Vessel. And this code is actually assigned to all those ships which come to Australia, right, or Australian territory, without fulfilling all necessary, that is, documentation, or all those required procedures, right? So it was not there. And SIEV X means that the ship was not sailing as per the Australian norms. So it is what that ship came to be titled at that time, that it was suspected illegal entry vessel, right? And then it is for this, maybe it is for this reason that it was not allowed to land in the Australian waters, or that is the two ships which came near this ship, they did not try to uh, uh, rescue the survivors there. Now friends, after this incident took place, nearly for 3 4 days, Australian government, what it said was that they did not have any information about the ship, about this ship here, right? This boat here which sank in the sea. And then eventually they were also of the view, but the question is that they used to track every record, and there used to be these what you call these spies, or those who would give information to the Australian Navy, Australian government, that boats were actually coming from illegal boats, or even illegal boats were actually coming from Indonesia to Australia. So even, I mean, it is hard to believe that this information was not there with the Australian Navy at that time, that this ship was coming there, ship was not in a good condition. So why these people were not allowed to, that is, either in the first place, why they were not rescued? Because there were just 45 people who were rescued from this from this tragedy. Why not the rest of them? Why there was so much delay in the water? One of the survivors, right, who actually survived this tragedy. She was known as Amal Basri, Amalbasry. She was a woman, and she died at the age of 53 because of cancer. But then she remained in Australia for 3 years, right? And what she said during these years was, I mean, during these three years, that what I want to say is that she kept fighting for such insensitivity on the part of the Australian Navy as to why there was so much delay. Because what the survivors said was that they remained floating on water for 21 hours, but then there were no rescue operations. That Amal Basri, and that Amal Basri has some similarities with the only survivor of the Calypsan capsize that we find in the play under question. That is Hazem Al Ayyad, that Irani survivor whom we find in the play, the only survivor on whose testimony the fate of most of the fate of that is that the fate of, you say, ex Benedict, it actually depends, right? That is one thing. And most of these people who were coming to Australia at this time, they were from either Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and so on. And mind you, all these countries are Muslim majority countries, right? So it was like that, perhaps there was this feeling that Muslims will not be allowed to enter, that is, Australia. Why? Because here we also need to take into account this September 2001, that is 9/11, right? What happened in America, those World Trade Centers, how they were bombarded by Laden, right? And then of course Laden or his the terrorist that he had trained, and then the terrorists that he had trained, of course, they were bombarded by them, and there was this Islamophobia, right, in the whole world, that Muslims are actually the enemies of humanity. It was that Islamophobia everywhere. Perhaps it is also one of the concerns that Hanie Rayson wants to bring to discussion here. So most of the refugees, they drowned, maybe because they were Muslims. That is why there was not that rescue operation there. And then this 9/11 incidents. And then I'll stop here only because of certain problems with my mobile, because it does not record more than a video which is more than 30 minutes. So I'll get back to you over this issue. I'll start with this issue again, which has to do with 9/11 plus M Tampa crisis, and then again as to why the play happens to be an exercise in what, an exercise in discussing, that is the government's response to the refugee problem world over, right? So I stop here. Thank you so much.